Hello, students from English department and from translation department, and welcome to our second lecture of the second semester. So, in this lecture, I will go over a little bit biography of Oliver Goldsmith, and then I will talk a little bit about the context of the play because it's very important and necessary to know a little bit about it, and then I will just guide you through the characters of the play, and then we'll go through the synopsis of the play, or let's say the summary of the play. I probably do the synopsis in different separate video because I don't wanna the video to be very long for you to upload or to download, let's say, from YouTube. So, starting from the author, I will not go actually in details with his information because you will not need all of this information. Rather, you will need to know a little bit about him, because if someone asks you who's Oliver Goldsmith, so at least you need to have a little bit information. Okay, so let's just start. Where was he born? So he was born in Ireland to Anglo-Irish parents, and then he moved to after that and settled in London. But before he did that, he traveled around Europe, and he was at that time also graduating from Dublin. So after he graduated from Dublin, he traveled all over Europe and then finally settled in London. Okay, so he was very prominent at the time, and he started writing poems, plays, short stories, and novels. And his readable style earned him the respect of more prominent writers. So a lot of writers started to respect him, especially the professor Edmund Burke and Samuel Johnson. So the important thing about it is that despite his acceptance into these high circles, there is a truth about Goldsmith because he was known to be deeply envious of his friend, and then he's awkward, ashamed of his physical appearance. So this is a little bit, let's say, deep information about his personal life. So he was a drunk, unfortunately. He was a gambler as well, and he was an extremely bad manager of his own money. Okay, so his friends often remarked him on the contrast between his personal life and his, let's say, beautiful writing. And this is a very important student to have a look between, let's say, the contrast between his personal life and how he used to look to himself, and between his, let's say, style of writing. As you can see here, his friends often remarked on the contrast between his personal life, the same thing that I told you, and then his beautiful writing. So there's a contrast. So he was not a loser, actually. He was a good writer. So Goldsmith died in 1774 after falling to seek medical care for a treatable kidney infection. So he had a kidney infection, and then that can cause his death. So this is a little bit information about the writer of the play. Okay, so let's just start from the historical context of the play. And we need to understand that the play takes place during the long and relatively peaceful reign of King George III. So, what happened at that time, there was a great transition for England. So England became an increasingly prosperous nation, occupying a central position on the world stage. So there was a revolution, and this kind of revolution is agricultural one. Okay, so this revolution led to an increase in agricultural production and a massive farmlands. Okay, so a lot of rural dwellers, let's say farmers from the city, started to to go from, let's say, the farmers, and a lot of farmers started to move from their place to the city because they were looking for work, because there was an agricultural revolution in which there is, let's say, a lot of factories were built. So for this reason, workers are started to leave their farms and move to the city side, let's say. So we can see here that the agricultural landscape was shifting from numerous small farms to several massive farms. Okay, and this change, in the number of farms, let's say, or the revolution itself, it drove many farmers out of the country and into the factories created by whom the industrial revolution. Okay, so the changing economic makeup of England at that time was reflected by the growth of the middle class. So, student, if there is a revolution, especially agricultural ones, so let's see here that there's gonna be a class distinction, which means there will be a poor people, and there will be a middle class people, and there will be a high people. Okay, so that the farmers, the low people, go to work for the middle people class, or let's say high class. So there is the countryman and there is the city man, let's say. So a lot of class divisions. This is very important, student, because this whole play, She Stoops to Conquer, is about class division, and we will see that hopefully when we come to Act 1 and Act 2. Okay, we're slowly but surely becoming more pronounced as the Industrial Revolution. Okay, in its very early years, was creating a new class of working poor in the increasingly cities. Okay, so you know, um, among these cities, a wealthy urban elite, they began to see themselves as superior, more cultured and worldly than people of the same class who lived in the countryside. So people who moved from the countryside and lived in the city and work in the factories, and they started to feel themselves superior to those people on the same class, let's say their friends, their families, okay, who live on the countryside. Okay, so this social dynamic sets the stage for many of the interaction in She Stoops to Conquer. Okay, this, let's say, class distinction is very obvious in the play. So this historical context of the play, or let's say the time in which the play was written, is reflected in the play. Okay, students, I will not go all over these things in details, only when I start explaining the synopsis of the play, so that you will understand what's happening and how the characters engage with another, especially the low class people, and how they treat the high class people, and on contrary, how the high class people treat the lower class people. Okay, so She Stoops to Conquer opened on March the 15th in 1773. So Dr. Johnson wrote, I know of nothing comedy for many years that has so much exhilarated an audience, that has answered so much the great end of comedy, making an audience merry. So what he meant by that, he was praising She Stoops to Conquer, because he said, I have never seen such a comedy that the audience started to laugh. The audience was very, feeling merry, like it means happy. Okay, they were very cheerful events that happened in the play. And in all Goldsmith writings, he tried to show the audiences, especially their errors. It tried to show to the audience the errors, okay, and to remind them of their blessings, to give them a love of life. Okay, because of his comic vision, critics have put Oliver Goldsmith in the great tradition of Chaucer and Shakespeare. So in She Stoops to Conquer, Goldsmith attacked the 18th century sentimental comedy. Do you remember in our first lecture we talked about comedy of manners and sentimental comedy? And do you remember when I talked about sentimental comedy in which there is an emotion and a little bit of tragedy? So Goldsmith, when writing She Stoops to Conquer, he criticized the sentimental comedy. He wanted to remove this sentimental comedy from writings. Okay, he wanted to restore the laughing comedy or the comedy of manners and banish sentimentality in theater. So She Stoops to Conquer is very effective. Why it is effective? Because of the broad characterization and the humor it has. So if you do remember that comedy, the difference between comedy and a tragedy, I told you that at the beginning of the comedy there is a funny mistake, or let's say an error, or a problem, a little bit of problem, but it's very funny and very silly. Okay, so the fun is always there in comedy. So the fun is in the situations, characters, and dialogue as well. So students try to pay attention to these three lines is very important. Okay, so various titles were suggested for the. So students try to pay attention to various titles, okay, were suggested. What it means by that She Stoops to Conquer, there is a various titles for the play. Then later on, Goldsmith decided to name it She Stoops to Conquer. So one of the various titles is The Bell's Stratagem, okay? The Old House and New Inn, The Mistakes of a Night. The last one is very important because it was chosen as a subtitle. So Goldsmith chose She Stoops to Conquer with The Mistakes of a Night as a subtitle. Okay, so let's have a little bit look of the characters of the play. So let me just try to do this a little bit. Okay, so we have the characters of the play, and we have Mr. Hardcastle, an old-fashioned country gentleman. And we have Mrs. Hardcastle. Okay, so here's a Mr., here's a Mrs., which means his wife. Tony Lumpkin, a country pumpkin. He is the son of Mrs. Hardcastle by a previous marriage. So Tony is Mrs. Hardcastle's son, and his father is not Mr. Hardcastle. Rather, his father is someone different. So Mrs. Hardcastle married someone, and then she had Tony Lumpkin, and after that she married Mrs. Hardcastle. Okay, we have Kate Hardcastle, the pretty daughter of Hardcastle. So Kate is Mr. Hardcastle's daughter and Mrs. Hardcastle's daughter. We have Constance Neville, and this is the pretty niece of Mrs. Hardcastle, and this is important because we will go over the Constance. Sometimes in the play they call her Constance, not the full name Constance Neville. Okay, then we have Istingo, who is the owner of the tavern, which means the inn, the Three Pigeons. Okay, and then we have young Marlowe, the handsome young gentleman. We have George Hastings. So this is Hastings, okay? So you have, when you read the name, to differentiate it between Hardcastle and Hastings. So George and Marlowe, both of them are friends. Sir Charles Marlowe, he's the father of Marlowe. Okay, and we have also a servant in Mrs. Hardcastle's household. So let's see how, like, all the scenes took place in the country, in the house of Mr. Hardcastle. Okay, so all the action took place there. And then in the nearby tavern, the Three Pigeons. Okay, student, I hope this is clear so far. In the next video, I will talk about the synopsis of the play.